The mistake usually begins in a season of confidence. A person works for 30 years, maybe 40. They do what responsible people are told to do.
They save. They contribute. They buy the index funds.
They watch the retirement balance climb in good years and flinch in bad ones. And somewhere along the way, they absorb a simple modern belief that feels intelligent, clean, almost elegant.
Stocks offer growth.
Cash is for safety.
And bonds? Bonds are the boring part.
The forgettable part.
The slow part.
The part people nod at without really understanding, then skip past on the way to something more exciting. That belief looks harmless when you're 32. It can become dangerous when you're 62. Because retirement is not ruined only by bad investing. It is very often destabilized by one quieter mistake. People build a portfolio for accumulating money, then try to retire using the exact same emotional logic. And those are not the same game. That is where bonds enter the story. Not as the dull instrument people imagine.
Not as a footnote.
As structure. As timing. As the difference between a retirement plan that survives stress and one that only works in theory. Most people don't skip bonds because they've studied them and rejected them. They skip them because bonds don't flatter the ego. Stocks tell a thrilling story.
Growth. Innovation. Momentum. Ownership. Optimism.
There is something cinematic about them. They feel like faith in the future. They let people imagine their money doing something dynamic while they sleep. Bonds don't perform that fantasy nearly as well. Bonds sound administrative. They sound gray.
Technical.
Adult in the least glamorous way possible. They seem like paperwork dressed as an asset class. And because of that, millions of people go through the most financially consequential years of their lives without ever really understanding what bonds are actually doing inside a retirement plan. Which is strange, because in the years just before retirement, and especially in the years just after it, the issue is no longer simply how high your money can climb. The issue becomes whether your money can behave when life does not. That is a very different question. Imagine someone in their early 60s. The house is quieter now. The children are older.
Maybe gone. Maybe half gone.
The career is still active, but its grip has changed. What used to feel like ambition now feels more like endurance. Sunday evening carries a different weight. Bad meetings linger longer. Corporate jargon sounds more insulting than impressive. The body still works, but it is no longer volunteering for unlimited uncertainty. At that age, people say they want growth. What they often mean, if they were fully honest, is something deeper. They want stability without stagnation. Income without panic. Flexibility without having to guess which year the market will punish them. They want a retirement that can survive reality, not just one that looks good in a spreadsheet built during a bull market. And this is where bonds stop being boring. Because bonds are not there to entertain you. They are there to change the emotional physics of retirement. That's the part most people miss. When you are in your 20s, 30s, even much of your 40s, a bad year in the market is mostly an intellectual event.
You may hate it. You may complain.
You may doom scroll. But if you're still earning, still saving, still buying through the volatility, time can repair a lot. The market falls, and your future self absorbs the drama. But retirement changes the architecture completely. Now the market is no longer just something you observe while continuing to earn a paycheck. It becomes something you may need to draw from while living. And that changes how damage works. A market crash in your 30s is often a discount. A market crash in the first few years of retirement can become a wound. Not because the market is evil. Because withdrawals create consequences. Because selling assets after a sharp decline locks in losses. Because a person who planned to let their portfolio recover may not have the luxury of waiting if bills, healthcare, housing, and life continue asking for money on schedule. This is where people begin to learn, sometimes too late, that retirement is not just about average returns. It is about sequence. The order in which good years and bad years arrive. And sequence risk is one of those phrases that sounds technical until it reaches into someone's actual life. Two retirees can get the same average return over 15 years and end up in very different places depending on when the losses happened. That is not a theory problem. That is a life problem. And bonds, when understood properly, become one of the tools that help soften that sequence risk.
Not eliminate it.
Not magically erase it.
But soften it. They create ballast. A reserve.
A controlled layer of the portfolio that is not trying to win a beauty contest. It is trying to help the whole structure survive bad timing. That matters because retirement is a timing problem disguised as a money problem.
You don't just need enough.
You need enough in forms that can support behavior. If your entire retirement identity is built on stock growth, then every major market drop becomes psychological warfare. You are not just watching numbers fall. You are watching your sense of safety fluctuate with headlines you cannot control. And human beings do not make their best long-term decisions when their nervous system is being dragged around by volatility. This is why so many intelligent people mismanage retirement. Not because they lack information. Because they underestimate the emotional cost of instability. They think they are building a portfolio. What they are really building is a future version of their own behavior. Will that future self panic? Will they sell at the wrong time? Will they overreact to losses because the losses no longer feel theoretical? Will they become timid after a downturn and miss the recovery? Will they stay overexposed to risk for too long because they spent decades associating more aggressive with more serious? These are not mathematical flaws.
They are human ones.
And bonds exist, in part, to make the human being inside the retirement plan more likely to survive the plan itself. That is a much more interesting job than most people give them credit for. The real power of bonds is not that they are exciting. It's that they let other parts of your portfolio do their job without forcing you to betray the plan at the worst possible moment. That's a subtle idea, but it's everything. If you know you have a meaningful portion of your portfolio in assets designed more for preservation, income, and stability than for explosive growth, you are less likely to view every market storm as an existential threat. You have a layer of money that exists for a different purpose. A layer that can cover withdrawals, reduce the need to sell stocks into weakness, and give time for recovery. In other words, bonds don't just change the portfolio. They change the pace of your decisions. And in retirement, pace is power. People imagine retirement failure as some dramatic act of irresponsibility. But often it comes from something much more ordinary, being forced to make too many important decisions under pressure. Pressure makes people rigid. Pressure makes people late. Pressure makes people reactive. Pressure makes people mistake motion for wisdom. A bond allocation, thoughtfully built, is one of the ways you reduce pressure before you need it reduced. That is what it means to master bonds. Not memorizing every duration formula like a machine. Not becoming a fixed income purist. It means understanding what role they play in the drama of a real human retirement. Because once you see that clearly, the whole conversation changes. You stop asking, are bonds exciting enough? You start asking, what problem are they solving that I will deeply care about later? And the answer is hauntingly simple. They help protect your ability to not be forced into bad decisions. They help create income predictability. They help stabilize the experience of drawing from a portfolio. They help slow the emotional bleeding that can happen when retirement collides with volatility. And perhaps most importantly, they remind you that retirement wealth is not just about maximizing.
It is about harmonizing. Growth matters. Safety matters. Liquidity matters. Income matters. Behavior matters. Taxes matter. Time horizon matters. Most people spend the accumulation years worshipping one god, return. But retirement is not a one-god world.
It is an ecosystem. And bonds are part of what makes the ecosystem livable. There is also another reason people skip them, one that is more psychological than financial. Bonds force a person to admit what stage of life they are entering. Stocks can preserve a kind of youthful mental posture. There's always another decade. Always another rebound. Always another recovery cycle. Staying heavily equity-driven can feel like staying aligned with a younger self who still has time to outwait anything. Bonds ask a more mature question. What if the issue is no longer whether time will eventually fix this? What if the issue is whether your life can function gracefully while time does whatever it wants? That question lands differently at 60 than it does at 30. Because by then, what people fear most is not always low returns. It is fragility. Having enough wealth on paper, but not enough structure. Being fine, as long as markets cooperate, but exposed the moment they don't. A lot of retirement plans are stronger in theory than in weather. Bonds are part of how you prepare for weather. And weather matters. There are years when interest rates rise and bonds disappoint. Years when inflation changes the conversation. Years when both stocks and bonds have rough stretches and people rush to declare the old rules dead. Those periods matter. They deserve honest attention. But they don't erase the underlying principle. The principle is not that bonds are always up. The principle is that retirement requires multiple tools doing different jobs. One part of your money can pursue growth. Another part can absorb shock. Another part can create optionality. Another part can meet near-term spending needs. That layered design is often what separates a plan that feels elegant in youth from one that remains durable in age. And there is something quietly profound about that. Because the older a person gets, the less impressive pure aggression becomes. There comes a point when the highest form of financial intelligence is not squeezing out every possible percentage point. It is designing a life that does not collapse under ordinary stress. Bonds belong to that design philosophy. They say, not every dollar needs to be a soldier charging uphill. Some dollars need to be shelter. Some dollars need to stand still enough so that the rest of your plan can move intelligently. That idea sounds modest.
It is not.
It is what allows retirement to become something more than a prolonged guessing game. Think about how most people imagine retirement before they are close to it.
More free time. Slower mornings. Less pressure. Travel, maybe. Grandchildren, maybe.
Reading, walking, gardening, volunteering, some version of rest that feels earned. What they often fail to imagine is how emotionally vulnerable unstructured time can become if the money underneath it is unstable. A person cannot relax properly while silently calculating whether a 20% market drop just changed the shape of the next 15 years. They cannot enjoy freedom while feeling financially airborne. They cannot receive retirement as peace if every news cycle threatens to translate into a lifestyle revision. This is the hidden emotional argument for bonds. They are not just part of a financial allocation. They are part of how you make retirement psychologically inhabitable. Without that, the numbers can still look impressive while the experience feels brittle. And maybe that's the real divide in retirement planning, the divide between wealth that looks sufficient and wealth that feels usable. Usable wealth is structured. Usable wealth respects timing. Usable wealth knows that a retiree is not a spreadsheet. They are a human being living through markets, headlines, health scares, family demands, boredom, longevity, inflation, and the strange identity shift that comes when the paycheck stops and time suddenly opens like a large unfamiliar room. That room can feel beautiful. It can also feel dangerous. Bonds are one of the quiet pieces of furniture that keep the room from echoing too much. And yes, they require thought. Different bonds carry different risks. Treasury bonds, corporate bonds, municipal bonds, tips, bond funds, ladders, durations, credit quality, yield curves, interest rate sensitivity. None of that should be ignored.
Mastery does matter.
But the deeper mastery is not just technical.
It is philosophical.
It is knowing what retirement money is for. If you think retirement money exists only to grow as much as possible, you will underappreciate bonds. If you understand that retirement money exists to fund a life with dignity, flexibility, and resilience, bonds begin making much more sense. That's why the people who truly understand retirement often sound less dramatic than the people chasing the hottest strategy. They know something the louder voices often don't. Retirement is not won through maximum intensity. It is won through sustainable design. And sustainable design is rarely glamorous from the outside. It does not look like financial bravado.
It looks like thoughtfulness. Stability. Layering.
Accepting trade-offs before the market forces them on you. There is maturity in that. And there is power in it too. Because once you understand bonds in their proper role, you stop feeling like you need to choose between growth and fear. Between being all in and being asleep. Between aggressive investing and hiding in cash. You begin to see the portfolio as an orchestra rather than a solo performance. Some instruments carry melody. Others carry rhythm. Others create depth. Remove the quieter layers, and the whole thing may still be loud, but it won't be complete. That is what many people do with retirement. They build something loud. Something impressive. Something optimized for ascent. But they forget to build the layers that help it endure tension. Then the market darkens. Then withdrawals begin. Then emotion enters. And suddenly what looked powerful reveals itself to be strangely fragile. This is why mastering bonds can feel almost like mastering humility. It requires accepting that retirement is not the same as youth, not the same as accumulation, not the same as hoping you can simply ride everything out forever. It requires admitting that control in retirement comes less from prediction and more from preparation. Less from being right all the time. More from not being ruined when conditions turn against you. That is wisdom, financially and otherwise. And when people skip bonds, they are often skipping that entire psychological evolution. They are still thinking like accumulators in a phase of life that demands stewardship. Stewardship of assets. Stewardship of income. Stewardship of volatility. Stewardship of your own peace. Because the truth is, retirement is not only about having enough money to stop working. It is about having a structure strong enough that stopping work does not simply expose a different kind of instability. That is why the people who seem calm in retirement are not always the ones with the highest balances. Sometimes they are the ones with the clearest architecture. The ones whose money has jobs. The ones who understand that not all dollars should be asked to perform the same role. The ones who built a system that can keep functioning even when the sky over Wall Street changes color. That kind of calm is not accidental. It is designed. And bonds, however unfashionable they may seem in certain seasons, are often part of that design. Not because they are perfect. Because retirement is delicate. Because sequence matters. Because volatility feels different when you are withdrawing. Because fear can become expensive. Because the market does not care how hard you work to reach this point. Because freedom, if it is going to last, needs support beams. So yes, most people skip this. They skip it because bonds feel slow, and we live in a culture that worships speed. They skip it because bonds feel dull, and we live in a culture that mistakes stimulation for intelligence. They skip it because they do not yet feel the emotional reality of what it means to live off a portfolio instead of merely contributing to one. But if you take the time to master bonds, not just as products, but as part of the emotional architecture of retirement, you begin to understand something much bigger than fixed income. You understand that the goal was never to build the most exciting portfolio. The goal was to build a life that does not become fragile the moment you finally try to enjoy it. That is what the best retirement plans do. They do not merely chase returns. They protect the ability to remain composed. To keep drawing income without panic. To let growth assets recover when they need to. To live through bad years without immediately rewriting the future. To make retirement feel like a season of life, not a high-wire act. And maybe that is the line worth remembering. Because in the end, bonds are not important because they are clever. They are important because retirement is. And once you understand that, the so-called boring part starts to look a lot less boring. It starts to look like the structure holding up the silence you worked your whole life to earn.